Hello YouTube, Own Soldier 86 here. We're going to continue where we left off, talking about modeling in Google SketchUp. And what I had done is I had taken a texture that I had created before that I knew was 64 by 64 pixels, and I applied it to a box here in Google SketchUp that is 800 meters by 800 meters. So just keep in mind those proportions, because that will be very important later when we start actually making our full level. We're going to want to make sure we remember that 64 pixels is going to relate to 800 meters in Google SketchUp. Let's take another example. And by the way, when we are doing this, if you didn't realize, what I did is I clicked on this image over here in the materials list, and it turns into a paint tool, and it can literally just paint any side of this box. And I'm actually going to leave a couple of these sides blank, and I will explain later why that is. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to highlight this entire box and hit the G key. G will create a component, and what that does is that allows me to keep this box, keep the integrity of this box actually, and I can move the whole thing around in Google SketchUp, which is very, very nice. And I'm just going to slide it over for a little bit because we're going to create another model here. Let's see, what should we try? One thing that we can do too, let's go ahead and make another 800 by 800, and use that push-pull tool to stretch it up to 800 meters. So again, another 800 by 800 meter squared box. And let's find another tool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click this and then go to this browse for material image file. And we're going to find something else. Let's find another texture. How about this foliage? And we know that that texture was also 64 by 64 pixels. So in other words, down here, it's going to translate 800 by 800. So we're going to say OK. And again, apply that texture to whatever spots you want. Highlight, G key to create a component, and create. And then I'm going to move this one over a little bit too. Now let's talk about a different sized object. I'm going to do 800 and 800 by again, create another square and another cube. And we know that we have some textures in here that were not that proportion. If I slowly let my mouse hover over these items here, we can see the dimensions right there. It says 64 by 64, 64 by 64. How about this one? We know that that one's not going to be 64 by 64, 64 by 32. We're going to say OK. Now, notice what happened here. This is actually pretty slick. In Google SketchUp, it automatically accounted for the fact that this image is going to be a little bit smaller, 64 by 32. Well, if you know your proportions very well, half of 64 is going to be 32, right? So we know that half of the pixels that we're going to need, or actually half of the size that we're going to need, is going to be 400. So 800 by 400 is correct. If for some reason this didn't put it in correctly, let's say instead of having it horizontally 800, it said horizontally 200, we could plug in the exact amount of horizontal sizing that we need, and it will automatically account for that in this box right here. If we need to break this for some reason, for instance, I want this texture to be 800 by 800, even though it is not, I can use this tool to break that link, and now I can create any size I want, 800 by 800, and it will not look good when I plug it in. So we're going to bring it back to what we had originally, 800 by 400, and say OK. Now we're going to apply that texture. And of course, knowing our proportions here, we had created an 800 by 800 metered squared cube. And because of that, we have two images of that texture, which we're not going to need. We only need one image. So we're going to push-pull this tool down by 400 meters. And now we have ourselves a platform with the correct proportions and textures. And what I'm going to do in the next video is show you that I'm going to apply other textures to different surfaces. For instance, the floor here and the ceiling here.